What if I told you the most powerful thing you can say when a woman pulls away is nothing at all? Most men don't know how to sit with silence. They feel her pulling back, and their instinct screams to close the gap. They text, they call, they chase explanations. They reach for connection, not because they're calm, but because they're afraid. Why is she distant? Did I do something wrong? Can we fix this? Their mind spirals, and in trying to make sense of her absence, they offer her the very thing that makes them forgettable: predictability. But here's the quiet truth that separates boys from men. When she pulls away, your silence says more than your words ever could. And the man who understands this, who resists the urge to react, who chooses stillness over panic, doesn't lose power. He reclaims it. Because when you stay silent, you don't just disappear. You become unreadable, unavailable, unshaken. And in that space, she feels something she didn't expect to: your absence. In today's video, we're going to break down exactly what happens when you stop chasing and start choosing yourself. How that one decision, to say nothing at all, shifts the dynamic, reclaims your value, and forces her to see you in a way she never did before. If you're ready to walk in silence with purpose, if you're ready to learn what most men never will, then stay with me. And if this already resonates with something real inside you, like this video and subscribe to Stoic Station, where strength begins in stillness and power returns when you no longer reach to be understood. You simply stand and let the silence do what words never could. Now let's begin. 1. Calm kills her expectations. You're not the man who panics. You're the man who disappears into calm. That single shift, choosing stillness over reaction, changes everything. When a woman pulls away, most men feel the tension rising in their chest. They can't sit with the uncertainty. They reach for their phones. They try to clarify, to explain, to ask what went wrong. Their instinct is to fill the silence, to make sure she knows they still care, to prove they're still there. But that's exactly what she expects. She expects the double texts, the emotionally charged messages, the late-night calls. She expects confusion, desperation, even anger, because that's what most men give her: predictability. And predictability is power for her. But you don't follow that script. You don't offer her the reaction she was prepared to manage. Instead, you do the one thing she didn't anticipate. You go silent, and you stay still. In that silence, something profound happens. You don't just hold on to your dignity, you take away her control of the narrative. She no longer knows what you're thinking. She can't gauge where you stand. Her assumptions begin to unravel, and in the quiet, something unexpected begins to take shape. She starts to feel you more in your absence than she ever did in your presence. You were supposed to react. You were supposed to fight. You were supposed to prove that you still needed her. But you didn't. You vanished into calm. And that calm, it's louder than any emotional outburst could ever be. It tells her everything without saying a word. I don't need to chase you to know who I am. Now she's not just wondering where you went. She's wondering who you really are. Because when a man remains composed in the face of uncertainty, he becomes unreadable, and unreadable becomes magnetic. You're no longer the man who breaks under pressure. You're the man who lets the pressure pass right over him. Your silence isn't empty. It's heavy. It carries your worth. It reflects your restraint. It holds your identity. And slowly she realizes something she never expected to feel. She's no longer sure if she can reach you, because she no longer feels certain that she matters to the man who finally stopped reacting. That's not punishment. That's evolution. And it begins with one choice most men never make: to respond not with noise, but with quiet power. 2. Every message pushes her further away. Every message you send is pushing her further away. It doesn't feel that way at first. When she begins to pull back, delayed replies, vague responses, cold energy, your instinct tells you to bridge the gap, to reach out, to say the right thing that brings her closer again. You think maybe if you can just explain how you feel, or remind her what you had, she'll snap out of it and come back. But what you don't see is that your efforts to reconnect are doing the opposite. Every message you send in this state of emotional urgency only deepens her retreat. Because silence from a woman isn't always an invitation for conversation. It's often a need for space. And when you ignore that space, you stop being someone she can feel and start becoming someone she wants to avoid. Women don't pull away because they need more words. They pull away because they need more clarity within themselves. And in that space of internal recalibration, your constant presence can start to feel like pressure. Even if you're being kind, respectful, or romantic, if it comes from a place of fear, it will always feel heavy, and she'll pull back harder. What you think is helping is actually feeding the very silence you're trying to escape. She may not even know exactly what she wants, but she knows she doesn't want to feel overwhelmed. She knows she doesn't want noise. And that's what desperate reassurance becomes: noise. So let her feel the distance. Let her notice the absence without you reminding her that you're still standing there, waiting. Because silence doesn't make you invisible, it makes your presence undeniable. It's not about withholding love, it's about withholding your energy from places where it's not being received. Not out of bitterness, but out of deep self-awareness. Every message you don't send is an act of restraint. Every pause is a statement. I'm not here to fix what's not mine to repair. You don't need to chase to prove your value. You don't need to explain your worth. Let the silence carry the message. Let her feel what it means to not hear from you. Because if something inside her still cares, that silence won't go unnoticed. And if it doesn't, at least you'll know you never begged for love that was already walking away. That's not just strength. That's self-respect in its quietest, most powerful form. 3. Silence is self-respect, not strategy. You didn't stay silent to manipulate. You stayed silent because you respected yourself. There's a world of difference between using silence as a tactic and using it as a boundary. One seeks to control someone else. The other comes from finally choosing not to abandon yourself just to be heard. When you stop responding, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation, it sends a message far more powerful than any words could. It says, I no longer need to be chosen to feel complete. That's not emotional detachment. That's emotional maturity. She may think you're pulling away to play hard to get. She might believe you're just trying to spark her interest by being distant. But that's only because she's used to men who go silent for effect, not men who go silent because they've outgrown the need for approval. Your silence isn't a trick. It's not a setup. It's not a performance. It's clarity. You've realized that your worth doesn't rise or fall based on whether she notices your absence. You're not here to compete for her attention. You're not here to chase what can't see your value unless it's wrapped in effort. And most importantly, you're not here to be rewarded for keeping quiet. You're quiet because you're no longer willing to overextend just to keep a connection alive that isn't reciprocating with the same energy. There's nothing passive about silence when it's rooted in self-respect. It's active, it's intentional, and it's powerful. Because a man who stays silent not to create tension, but to preserve his peace, he's not just walking away from noise. He's walking toward a life where he no longer compromises who he is to be seen, chosen, or kept. You're not holding back to gain control. You're letting go to stay whole. And that difference is what separates a man playing games from a man living in truth. 4. From replaceable to rare. Did I lose a man who doesn't chase because he doesn't have to? That question doesn't come right away. At first, she assumes you'll react the way you always have, by showing up, reaching out, holding on. She tells herself you'll wait, that your silence is temporary, that eventually you'll fold under the pressure of not hearing from her. She thinks time is on her side. But then the silence stretches, and you don't return. You don't double back. You don't check in. You don't chase. And something inside her begins to shift. What once felt certain, your availability, your attention, your emotional presence, starts to feel like something she may have taken for granted. The man she assumed would always be there is no longer predictable. The version of you she had mapped out in her mind no longer responds the way he used to. She's not sure what happened, but she knows something has changed. And it's not just the silence, it's the energy behind it. You've gone from being the man who waited to the man who walked, from the one who reacted to the one who reflected, from accessible to unavailable in the most grounded, self-contained way. And when a man no longer needs to be noticed, he becomes impossible to forget. She might scroll through your messages wondering why none of them are new. She might replay your last interaction in her head, trying to find clues, explanations, proof that you're still emotionally there. But what lingers isn't just your absence, it's the weight of what she lost. Not someone desperate to stay in her life, but someone who no longer needs to prove his worth to be in it. You didn't become rare because you changed how much you care. You became rare because you stopped overextending yourself in places that made you feel replaceable. And the moment a man honors his own presence like that, something irreversible happens. He's no longer an option. He becomes a standard. That realization doesn't just challenge her. It disrupts everything she thought she understood about who you were. You didn't just disappear. You transformed. And in doing so, you became the one man she can't easily define anymore. Not because you're distant, but because you've finally become whole without needing her to notice. 5. You enjoyed her, but never needed her. You were never dependent on her attention. You enjoyed her presence, but you didn't need it. There's a quiet strength in a man who can fully appreciate a woman's presence, her energy, her laughter, her closeness, without ever being consumed by it. You didn't love her from a place of emptiness. You loved her from overflow. And that makes all the difference. She may have believed that your affection came with strings, that your attention was tied to your dependence, that the more you gave, the more you needed in return. But what she didn't realize, until you fell silent, was that your love was never about validation. It was a gift, not a request. You weren't trying to fill a void. You were offering something whole. So when she pulled away, you didn't collapse. You didn't spiral. You didn't beg for her return or chase after the echo of something that used to feel full. You realigned. You redirected the energy you once gave so freely, back to yourself, back to your health, your goals, your inner peace. You didn't stop caring. You simply stopped pouring into a space that no longer reflected mutual respect. And in doing that, you proved something rare, that it's possible to care deeply without losing your footing, that it's possible to be emotionally present without becoming emotionally dependent. Most men don't know that balance. They confuse love with attachment, devotion with self-abandonment. But you've learned the truth. Real connection doesn't cost you your center, it reinforces it. You weren't waiting to be completed by her. You were already complete. And loving her wasn't your identity, it was your choice. So when she left, you didn't fall apart. You simply remained the man you were before she arrived, only quieter, clearer, stronger. That kind of man, he doesn't need to be needed. He only needs to be true to himself. And that's what makes him unforgettable. 6. Dignity doesn't argue, it walks. You don't preserve your dignity by winning arguments. You preserve it by knowing when to stay calm and walk away. There's a moment, often quiet, often lonely, when you realize the conversation you're hoping to have will never bring you the peace you're looking for. Not because your voice doesn't matter, but because you've been speaking into a space that stopped listening a long time ago, so you stop. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally seen the cost of staying in a dynamic that pulls you out of yourself. That's not weakness, that's restraint, that's self-respect. You didn't scream, you didn't send the long message, you didn't fight to make her understand. You chose something harder, to let go without needing the last word. Because you've come to understand that clarity isn't earned through arguments, it's revealed through behavior. If someone creates confusion, then hands you silence, you don't chase them for answers. You step back and observe who they become when you no longer play your part in the emotional back and forth. This isn't about pride, this is about principle. You're not trying to win her back through debate. You're not entering a war of emotional reactions just to prove that you mattered. You matter even in silence. You matter even when you choose to walk instead of fight. Dignity doesn't plead. It doesn't beg for closure. It knows when to stop showing up where presence is no longer met with care. And that kind of quiet strength? It leaves an imprint. Not because you shouted, but because you refused to lose yourself trying to be heard. There's honor in walking away with your head high. Not because it didn't hurt, but because you refused to become someone you're not just to hold on to someone who already let go. In the end, you didn't need to defend your worth. You just needed to stop handing it over in the name of love. And that choice, to walk away instead of argue, is what keeps your dignity intact long after she's gone. 7. You're not punishing. You're progressing. You're not punishing her. You're just showing your life moves forward with or without her. It's easy to be misunderstood when you choose silence. Some women will see it as revenge, as withdrawal meant to sting, as a way to make her miss you, regret you, or chase you. But the truth cuts deeper, and it's far less dramatic than she might assume. You're not trying to hurt her. You're simply finished pouring your time, your energy, and your emotional presence into uncertainty. At some point, you realize that constantly showing up for someone who keeps stepping back isn't love, it's self-neglect. And so you stop, not to provoke, but to protect, not to gain leverage, but to reclaim your balance. This isn't slamming a door, it's walking through one you should have stepped through a long time ago. And that departure doesn't come with fireworks or final speeches. It comes with stillness, clarity, quiet self-respect. It's not meant to make her feel small. It's meant to remind you that you were never meant to stay small, just to stay close. And while she may try to frame your silence as an emotional tactic, she'll eventually feel what's really happening beneath the surface. A shift. You're no longer orbiting her story. You're writing your own again. That's what progress looks like. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply chooses peace over permission, movement over explanation, forward without resentment. And in that choice, you prove that you're not staying silent to punish her. You're staying silent because you've outgrown the need to be understood by someone who no longer listens. 8. You don't win her back. You win yourself. You don't treat her return as a victory, because you were never playing a game. If she comes back, it won't be because you convinced her. It won't be because you pleaded your case or competed with silence until she noticed the void. It will be because, in the absence of your effort, She finally felt the difference between attention that chases and presence that stands still. But by the time that realization arrives, you're no longer where she left you. Because you weren't waiting. You weren't hoping for recognition or holding your breath for her to see your value. You were becoming, quietly, relentlessly, without an audience. You were never trying to prove something to her. You were learning how to walk forward with yourself, with your peace, your focus, your sense of worth finally anchored in something deeper than anyone's attention. That's why, if she returns, it doesn't feel like a win. It just feels like a moment. Because you've already experienced something greater than her validation. You've lived the version of yourself that doesn't need it anymore. You've woken up without her and still remembered who you are. You've sat in silence and didn't crumble. You've stopped reaching and started rising. You don't see her presence now as a prize. You see it as optional, because the only thing you ever truly needed was already yours. And that was you. So no, you're not waiting at the door. You're not keeping a scoreboard. You're not playing a game where her return determines your worth. You're walking forward, strong, steady, and certain. And that, in the end, is the only victory that ever mattered. 9. You're not driven by fear. You're defined by presence. You remind her, and more importantly yourself, that you are not a man driven by fear, impulse, or neediness. There comes a moment when your silence begins to speak louder than anything you could have said. Not because it's cold or calculated, but because it's rooted in something deeper than emotion. It's rooted in identity. She remembers your words, but what stays with her longer is what you didn't say. There were no desperate texts begging for clarity, no late-night confessions trying to undo the distance, no emotional unraveling in the hope that she'd come back. Just stillness, just space, just a man who no longer reacts out of fear, but responds, if at all, from grounded presence. And that presence, it's unmistakable. Because when a man stops chasing what isn't meeting him halfway, he doesn't just create silence, he reclaims his center. You didn't vanish. You simply withdrew your energy from the places that were no longer holding it with care. And that decision wasn't about punishment, it was about preservation. What's left in the wake of your restraint is a clear message. I know who I am, even without your validation. And that energy, confident, collected, calm, is exactly what she didn't expect. You're not driven by the fear of losing her. You're defined by the strength it took to let her go. And maybe that's what catches her off guard. The realization that the man she thought needed her attention to feel whole doesn't anymore. But the shift isn't really about her. It's about you. You didn't lose her. You found yourself in the silence, in the waiting, in the uncomfortable space where most men collapse, and you chose to rise. You learned that you don't have to beg to be seen or break down to be heard. You just have to be still enough and strong enough to remember your worth without anyone reminding you of it. That kind of presence doesn't ask to be respected. It commands it, not through force, but through unwavering self-respect. And once you carry that energy, it doesn't just shift the relationship, it redefines the man you've become. Summary. You let go, not to lose her, but to find yourself. At first it might have seemed like it was about her, about the silence, the distance, the shift you didn't see coming. You thought letting go would mean losing something important, losing love, losing closeness, maybe even losing your sense of who you were when you were with her. But with time, the truth begins to reveal itself. This was never about her. It never really was. It was about you, about the man you were becoming all along, the one who stopped chasing closure and started choosing clarity, the one who no longer needed to convince someone to see his worth, because he finally decided to guard it himself. When you stopped reaching out, you didn't fall into bitterness, you fell into stillness. And from that stillness, something strong emerged, not loud, not reactive, but solid and certain. You began to understand that real strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand to be seen. It shows up in how quietly and powerfully you move when no one's watching. It lives in the way you choose peace over proving, composure over chaos, and truth over temporary comfort. Letting her go was never the loss. The real loss would have been abandoning yourself just to keep her close. And now, without the noise, without the games, without the pressure to perform or the need to be needed, you stand on your own 2 feet, not because it's easy, but because it's honest. Because in the end, staying silent after she pulled away wasn't about punishing her or pretending you didn't care. It was about giving yourself space to remember the man you are without all the confusion. The man who doesn't beg. The man who doesn't chase validation. The man who doesn't trade his peace for temporary connection. You didn't lose her. You reclaimed yourself. And that will always be the most powerful thing you could ever walk away with. If that touched something real inside you, if even a part of this message reminded you of the strength you forgot you had, then pause. Take a quiet moment and honor that. Like this video and subscribe to Stoic Station, because here, we don't chase validation, we don't beg to be seen, and we do not break ourselves just to hold on to what's slipping away. Here, we reclaim our value, not through noise, but through stillness, through restraint, through the quiet, steady power of a man who no longer needs to be chosen, to know he's already enough.